I was warned not to get too close, but I guess I might have to work closer.
Okay.
Yeah? Hello, hello? Not that you really want to hear me, but you'll miss a lot of the interesting information if you can't. So here we go. Welcome, everybody, to the District 5 Dartmouth Center All Candidates Forum, sponsored by Grace United Church and Christ Church Anglican here in downtown Dartmouth. We do have a video of welcome from the Dr. Kyle Wagner, the Reverend Dr. Kyle Wagner, the rector here, who is on vacation and cannot be here in person. Do we have that tape now? Coming up. Yeah. How are we doing up there?
Good evening. I'd like to welcome you here to Christ Church. My name is Reverend Kyle Wagner. I'm the rector here this evening. Let me take a moment to gratefully acknowledge that we are in the ancestral and unceded territory of the Ndp people. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be here with you this evening in person, but will be in spirit. I'm on vacation right now in Centigrade Island, but I do want to welcome you here to Christ Church, inclusive community, people united for justice and love. Today is a very important day. As we know, folks are gathered here. The candidates are here as well. I want to thank the candidates for gratefully putting your names forward for Dartmouth South. Also, thank you to all those folks in the community who contributed the questions for tonight's debate. Also, a warm thank you to our technical folks, the audio-visual, who are live streaming our event this evening. I do want to thank our moderators, Reverend Stephen Fran from Grace United and Jeff Turnbull from here at Christ Church. Also want to thank Candy Sharon and Shirley and Mark Hazen for their time, their talent, and their dedication to this evening's event.
Thank you, Dr. Kyle. I would also like to add Kyle's thanks and mine and Stephen's to Carolyn Chenhall and Margie Vaughn, both from Christ Church, who have put in a lot of time and effort to make this happen. Thank you both. Now, to introduce the moderators, my name is Jeff Turnbull. If you've ever heard my name before, it's because I had a long career, A, because you're old, and B, because I had a long career at CBC, and D, of course, because I am a parish member here at Christ Church. And my co-moderator, Stephen.
I'm Stephen Fram, and I'm from across the street at Grace United, and it's a pleasure to be with you participating in this important event.
I'd also like to acknowledge the two candidates who are with us tonight, Chris Curtis and Claudia Chender. They have taken time to be here and meet with us and tell us what they think about all of these questions which you and other people have put together to put to our candidates. I would also like to acknowledge that we meet and work in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people who have been living on these lands since time immemorial. Recognizing that this is a small but meaningful step in reconciliation and the continued efforts of building a strong nation-to-nation relationship, we are all treaty people. All right, a little bit of the ground rules here. The event will be up to 2 hours long and no more. It'll be possible to meet the candidates outside afterwards. The washroom, in case that becomes an issue, is at the back and to the right. Straight back is one of the exits. Through that door and out the side is the other exit, just in case we get to the point where we have to make an exit. So there will be an opportunity for you to submit questions. Between now and 7:30, if you have a question you want to submit, we'll ask you to write it on that board at the back there. There's a marker there. Keep the questions clear and concise if you can. And we will put those questions to the candidates at the end of the prepared questions.
I think that we will change that to 7:10. So your questions need to be
Get them
ready
done.
by...
Do it
no.
now?
What time did you say originally?
7:30? I gave them a half an hour to think about it.
Yeah, oh, half an hour. That's fine. Okay, sorry. I'm thinking that I'm still in another time zone.
You're in the Newfoundland time zone. I know. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay. I will say, unfortunately, the Liberal Party candidate Leslie McKay is not joining us. She was offered the opportunity to be here or to submit a video to introduce herself to you, and she declined. I will also say that the Green Party candidate, Skylar Martini, planned on being here. He is not here yet. If he does come, we will, of course, seat him. All right, ground rules for this forum. Beginning in alphabetical order, candidates will alternate speaking first until the closing statements. Each portion will have maximum speaking limits, and a 30-second warning will be given. When the time limit is reached, the microphone will be cut off. There is actually a gremlin in the back there, and when the warning is given, 5 seconds from then, bang, off you go. That's just they should be doing that to me, because that would get me out of here quickly. Yeah. Candidates will be given opening statements for 2 minutes. Then there are 15 prepared questions. These questions have come from the public, from you, from various people, and have been rewritten and given to us, and Stephen and I will be reading the questions for the candidates to consider. The audience-sourced questions will be a little extra time because they haven't had time to think about them yet, so they'll get 2 minutes to answer any of the questions which you have come up with and write down for us. And at the end of the forum, there will be closing statements 1 minute long from each of the candidates. So I have been asked to suggest that we keep this quiet and orderly. One of the things that means is perhaps no clapping until the end of the forum. I think if we can hold back our applause and our appreciation, that would be appreciated by everybody. We have a limited amount of time. We want to get the questions put forward, and we want to hear the answers. We also ask that people do not interrupt other candidates, either the candidates interrupting each other or people in the audience interrupting the candidates when they're speaking. If interruptions occur, we will restart the timer for their time. I hope that's reasonably clear, that I haven't muddied things up too much for you. Good. So, Stephen, over to you.
And now it's a pleasure to have opening statements from our candidates, and it's in alphabetical order. So, Claudia, you have 2 minutes to make your opening statement.
Okay, this is like a really weird form of speed dating. I'm Claudia Chender. I have had the privilege of representing Dartmouth South for the last 4 years. I want to thank Christ Church and Grace United for having us here tonight, and was really struck by the notion of a church that represents a people united for justice and love. So that's a really beautiful way to start this evening, and I thank you for that. And thank you to Mr. Curtis, and I see Sam Austin, our counselor, in the audience, so thank you also, Sam. I love Dartmouth, and I feel so fortunate to represent this community, to champion this community, and also am heartbroken by Dartmouth every day, by the cases that come into my office, by the people I meet on the doorstep. And so I hold both of those things tonight as I will talk to you about the Ndp Vision, which is also, I believe, a vision of justice and love, and really a vision of the future for Dartmouth and also for the province as a whole, where no one is left behind. And so, Dartmouth is fantastic. I always say we're a small town in a big city, We want to retain that. We want to retain the connection we have with our neighbors, the ways that we look after each other as we face some pretty unprecedented growth and also challenges. And so I am asking for your support to do that, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Good evening, folks.
And Chris.
Thank you. Good evening, folks. My name is Chris Curtis, and I'm the Progressive Conservative candidate for Dartmouth South in the 41st provincial election here in Nova Scotia. I first want to thank the Christ Church and Grace United for the opportunity to meet tonight and to share with you some platforms in terms of how we're directed towards these questions and some of the ideas that we have for correcting some of these issues. It's very hard in a minute and a half to fit platforms into an entire answer, so I'm going to do my best to bring those to an abbreviated point that we can make sense of it. I've lived in this community now for 3 years. I've worked in it for over 15 in the construction sector. The company I worked for took me all over the world. I've been to the Middle East, I've been all across North America, the high Arctic, I've even been on Sable Island. This is one of the best places in the world to live, bar none. Nova Scotia is a wonderful province, and Dartmouth is an incredible community. The sense of community here is unlike anything I've really experienced since the time I was growing up in Cape Breton. Just on my street alone, we have 5 or 6 homes that share a communal snowblower and take care of each other during the winter. These are the types of things that endear the community to me. So I look forward to your questions tonight. And I wish Claudia that we have a constructive and an informative debate, that we're able to share our ideas with you and handle your questions as best of our abilities as we can. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Claudia. So our first question, and it will be on the screen as well if you want to have a look at the wording for it, but what do you see your role as an MLA? And we will switch the order, so we'll begin with Chris.
Okay. Well, before I explain that, I'd like to express my thanks to Claudia Chender for her service for the last 4 years. I have learned more about this community in 3 weeks than I could have learned in a lifetime had I not put my name on a ballot. The needs of this community are pretty severe. We've got some issues, and we need to get through them, and we need to do it constructively and with good policy. As your elected MLA, I want to be the loudest cheerleader. I want to champion our business community to HRM, to the province, to Canada, to the world. I'll make sure that our community is reflected in legislation, that our needs and desires as a whole will help make well-rounded policy. In using this information, we'll get it from all stakeholders. Provide counsel and assistance to those that are in need. Your MLA should be an example of community stewardship, volunteering, and environmental accountability. I may not always be successful, but I promise the failures will not temper my passions to do better. I will show up every day and champion the interests of this community. I will be accountable. I will be accessible. Your MLA needs to be a focal point, the individual that, regardless of party color, is prepared to meet with the other side and work collectively towards the common good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Claudia, same question.
Well, I think I have served in this role for the last 4 years, and the way I see this role is sort of 2 pieces, which I think Chris touched on. One is to listen to and represent and champion the community and its needs, to offer help to constituents in our offices. And the other is to propose and debate and impact legislation. And I've been really privileged to have a hand in doing both of those things quite extensively in the last 4 years. So in terms of organizing around issues, you know, we've really spent a lot of time raising the issue of the health of our lakes in the provincial legislature, along with Susan LeBlanc, my colleague in Dartmouth North. We've talked about affordable housing, access to primary care and mental health services. access to childcare, as we've seen early childhood education centers close in Dartmouth South, which has been really challenging, the changes to education and more. And so those are some examples of working for the community and championing the community. So people tease me that my staff doesn't let me go to Portland Street for coffee in the morning sometimes because I never make it back. I'm so proud of our small locally owned businesses. We have a really incredible situation there. And in the legislature, I've been lucky to have a small but strong voice on lots of pieces of legislation. I've introduced my own legislation, and as as the House leader for the NDP, I've been able to work constructively with other parties and intend to continue doing that.
Thank you, Claudia. We will move to the second question. To be in government is to be faced with many complex problems that require difficult choices. Personally, what are your two top priorities? And we'll begin with Claudia.
I'm going to give you three, but they're really one. So I would say the three that I've been hearing about the most at the door during this election and in the last 4 years are healthcare, housing, and the environment, not necessarily in that order. But I say that they're one because really those are the social determinants of health. Those are what make us able to do everything else that we want to do. And so those are complex problems, all of them, indeed. I think access to primary and mental health care we hear about again and again, investment in seniors and the need for that. Housing is it's such a turning point in housing right now. It's such a crucial issue for so many residents. I have a minute and a half, so I can't tell you the way that we will address all those things, but I will tell you that many of those issues are issues we've championed in the legislature for the last 4 years, and until the pandemic, they were issues that didn't even merit a response from the government and from other parties. We were sort of laughed at as bleeding hearts when we talked about issues like the need for more long-term care beds, the need to meet the environmental crisis and its demands of us as humans. And so I think we stand on our record and we will continue to advocate in the way that we have for the last 4 years.
Thank you, Claudia. Same question to you, Chris.
Two. One is specific to the community and one is a personal passion. First, priority number one is affordable housing. The Canadian government had $1.5 billion in 2021 and 2022 for the Rapid Housing Initiative. The Canadian government also put $2.5 billion with CMHC in programs for developers for low-income housing. $13 million for 43 affordable homes in Halifax. $8.7 million for an additional 52 units in Halifax. $115 million low-cost loan from CMHC for 76 affordable apartments in Halifax. Dartmouth is not getting its fair share. Priority number one, get our share of that money. It will be a primary focus if I'm elected. Priority number two will be to work with my colleagues in Province House to draft legislation to open the renewable market in Nova Scotia. We're doing a terrible job. And Emera and Nova Scotia Power has benefited for far too long from outdated and antiquated legislation. It slows the deployment of renewable energy. Those will be my two primary focuses.
Thank you, Chris. And the third question. What do you see as the role of the provincial government in post-COVID-19 recovery? And since we're switching the order that we have on paper doesn't quite work because Styler is there, so we're going to do it on the fly. So it will be Chris who starts.
Sure. Thank you. Our economy has faced the single biggest contraction of modern times. We need to get Nova Scotians back to work, and we need to make sure that our businesses are ready. We need economic growth. It's evident in the debts that we're incurring to provide to many Nova Scotians a level of service in our institutions, healthcare, and infrastructure that's lacking. We live in a province where 60% of the working population works for one level of government, or three levels of government, and we need them. And 75% of our private sector retires without a pension. 75%. They're going to become wards of the state at some point. We have more people aging out of our workforce than entering it, the highest median age over 65, and the lowest median incomes in any province of Canada. In short, right now, we're incapable of generating the economic wealth needed to pay for the services we demand as citizens. We need to make a concerted effort to attract people and businesses to this province. And if we want to reach sustainability, we need a lot of people. The backbone of the PC plan is an aggressive immigration strategy that calls for a doubling of Nova Scotia's population by 2060. It's significant. It's very significant. We need Nova Scotians to have a reason to come home. We need to attract talent from other provinces, and we need to attract people internationally.
Thank you, Chris. Claudia, same question.
We need to take care of people. We need to make sure that we all come out the other side of this pandemic, and that we're all attended to. And we need a new way forward. At the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of people said, we're all in the same boat, and you know, we're not all in the same boat. We're all in different boats, and we're on the same ocean, and the ocean is dying. And so we have a lot of challenges in front of us, and you know, we really have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and if there is a silver lining of this pandemic, it shows us how fragile our society is, our economy is, our health is, and the only real antidote or way that we can prepare for that is with resilience and kindness. And so we have talked about a recovery task force that incorporates, yes, business, but more than business, that also includes healthcare and not-for-profit and labor and environmental NGOs, so that together we can talk about a way to go forward. I'm sure everyone has seen the IPCC report that was released this week. We cannot ignore the environment, and not ignoring the environment means necessarily transforming our economy now. And that transformation is going to require all hands on deck, and so we would approach it that way.
Thank you, Claudia. Jeff?
Yes, thank you both. We now go on to a series of questions which were put together with input from the public. The Senate Special Committee on Poverty in 2008 recommended establishing a guaranteed livable income. The COVID emergency and the benefits of the CERB program suggests guaranteed annual income should be reconsidered. What are your party's views on a guaranteed annual income, and what are the benefits and challenges in its implementation? So we'll start with Claudia.
Okay. Well, certainly there are benefits of a livable income, and I think with the government, the federal CERB program, we've seen that people who would otherwise be in unimaginably dire straits right now have been able to, in many cases, keep a roof over their head and food on their tables. The challenge, though, with guaranteed livable income proposals are that in some proposals, it does not take into account maintaining our current social safety net. And so the notion that you would put people's money in people's pockets, of course, we all need more income, or enough income, I should say. But you know, like the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives did a study where they said that government could permanently expand the stock of affordable housing, childcare, and public transit, eliminate user costs for pharmacare, dental care, and post-secondary for half the annual cost of a national basic income. So our platform is that we would absolutely study a basic income, but as a precondition for that income, we still have so much work to do on our fundamental social programs and making sure that they work. So we have to consider more than just cash transfers to individuals. It's a simple way, but there's other work that needs to be done. So we would study it with those issues in mind.
Chris.
The Parliamentary Budget Office estimates universal basic income will cost the federal government $87.6 billion in 2022 and 2023, and growing to $93 billion by 25-26. Add to that an additional supplement for people with disabilities of $1.7 billion or $6,000 per person per year. When they looked at universal income, they used the Ontario Basic Income Pilot Project. It was going to give individuals $16,989 a year, and it would give couples $24,027 of income per year, respectively. Now, whether or not that's livable is up for great debate. Add to that, though, after reviewing the projects, there's been several complete studies conducted. The first one was a 529-page report authored by the University of British Columbia, Simon Fraser University, and the University of Calgary. And it concluded after a 3-year investigation that the basic income for all is not the best way to address poverty in social programs. Instead, the report said government should be boosting existing support programs for vulnerable groups through improved disability assistance, dental care programs, and more money to help with working poor pay rent. At face value, the proposition of reducing our impoverished community by 50% in 1 year is a very attractive goal. But there's limitations to the policy. And I need to know more before I or my party actually fully endorses universal basic income.
Thank you, Chris. This one is for you first, Chris, as well. Nova Scotia's potential is limited by the fact that 12% of Nova Scotians live in poverty, including over 1 in 3 single adults under the age of 65. Issues such as homelessness, addiction, unemployment, disability, and lack of education contribute to poverty and are outcomes of poverty. Yet this complex issue is not given the priority it needs. What do you or your party identify as your top 2 priorities for addressing poverty, and how do you plan to address them in the short and medium term? Chris.
Minute and a half for this is tough.
Yes.
Listen, you know, we have to address some very serious issues. And first of all, we also have to admit that addressing our healthcare issue and in mental health care in Nova Scotia and housing will go a long way towards solving some of these issues. And you can't talk about mental health without discussing addictions. Not always, but often they're intertwined. And a recent report shows that EMS personnel are using naloxone every 2 days in the opioid crisis. We know addiction affects our low-income communities bad. It affects all communities, but it's having a severe consequence on our low-income population. Of the nearly $5 billion spent in the Nova Scotia provincial budget on health spending, only 7% is for mental health, $344 million. It's allocated just for mental health care, and there's few illnesses that touch as many people as mental health care. By burying treatment and prevention, accountability, responsibility, and investment within a larger health budget, it's not given the attention that it needs. The status quo is failing Nova Scotians, and it's having a profound impact on our low-income community. Change is needed. We know mental health and health are 2 main issues for people at low income. I'd like to know the numbers of the people on the waiting list for primary health care that are low income. I'm guessing it's higher than our middle to high. We need to treat problems that trap people in poverty. Health, mental health.
Sorry, thanks, Chris. We did warn you that there is a gremlin in the back, and he will turn the mic off at the end of your time. I'm sorry. Claudia.
So if, from my point of view, government's job is to take care of people, all people. And if you look at our legislative record, we have always centered that in our program, and we will obviously continue to do that. We have the highest rate of child poverty in Canada. The one, single adults, as you said, also, these are the folks that I see in my office all the time. And I think we'll have a chance to talk about substance use disorder later, because I believe that sort of cuts across all demographics. But in terms of addressing poverty, it's hard to narrow down to 2, but certainly I would say housing. So the NDP would keep the rent control that exists currently so that people don't face a massive wave of evictions when the state of emergency ends. We would invest significantly in non-market, genuinely affordable housing. We would offer inclusionary zoning so the city could also actually build affordable housing. And childcare. So as the education critic and the critic for the status of women in my role as MLA, I can tell you that a lack of childcare, a lack of before and after care for school keeps women out of the workforce, and in many cases keeps women and families in poverty. And so that's another piece of our platform, that $10 a day childcare and free before and after school-based care for children. There's a lot more, including raising income assistance rates, but
A good point to stop on, yes. Thank you, Claudia.
sure.
We're back to affordable housing is obviously a big issue for people in this area. I'll give you this question. Affordable housing is both a supply and a demand problem. In this writing, we saw temporary structures being built on public land to house the homeless. How does your party plan to deal with the ongoing issue of affordable housing and the immediate risk of homelessness?
So housing is really complex and it's really simple because people who are homeless need one thing, they need housing. And so the way that you solve that is to provide housing. And so the notion that, well, it's a market issue and it's a supply issue and we're going to build condos downtown and eventually there's going to be more space and people will have a place to live just doesn't cut it. It doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. People need a place to live now. I started to talk about that in the last question, but in addition to those issues that I spoke about, we would also have a right of first refusal. So when multi-unit rental buildings come on the market, this has been pioneered in Montreal. The government would have a right of first refusal to buy those. Right now, they're often being sold for speculation to developers. Government could maintain those as low-income housing, public housing, inclusionary zoning, as I mentioned. And it's really important to say that we would actually meet the promises laid out in the roadmap. So we would have accessible housing. We would have more small options home, which the government has been promising people with disabilities forever and ever. And many of those folks are either experiencing housing insecurity or living in inappropriate housing. And we would address the financialization of housing. So we are seeing massive real estate investment trusts buying up huge swaths of rental properties, and they do not care who lives there, and they do not care what their experiences is, and they don't care about evicting them because it's about profit, and we need to curb that profit.
Nice timing. Chris.
What's going on in Dartmouth has been building for many years. As it becomes increasingly more expensive to live on Peninsula Halifax, people are migrating to cheaper housing markets. Dartmouth is still close to the city. So we've had a lot of people that can't afford housing anymore in Peninsula Halifax move to Dartmouth. We've also had people come from larger markets in Ontario and Quebec to live here during COVID. And we have a lot of people in their retirement years moving out of the county and into the city to be closer to accessible health care. We need to build inventory. That's the answer. We need to build inventory. 30% of the land in this province is owned by the provincial government, and there's not even a complete list of the lands that they own. The PC party will dedicate lands that are currently in surplus for the provincial government for low-income housing. We need to get our share of the $1.3 billion the Canadian government is spending on the housing affordability issue. And we also need to get a part of the $2.5 billion that CMHC has. As I said before, Peninsula Halifax has received $200 million in 3 different developments. Tim Hallman has a 46-unit building being used in the CMHC funding program that's 30% and 50% below market rates. The more specific question is, where's our funding for Dartmouth South? Where is it? Why haven't we gotten it? And why aren't we using it? I'll stop there.
Good point. Please forgive me for going off script for just one moment, but the question that I would like personally to have answered by both of you in one sentence or less is, do you consider that housing is a basic human right? Shelter, a basic human right?
Yes.
That's all I wanted to know. Thank you. Next, affordable housing is both a supply and, oh no, we've been there. Nova Scotia, my favorite topic. Nova Scotia, indeed most of the world, is short of doctors, nurses, and other health professionals. Thousands of Nova Scotians do not have a family doctor or primary health caregiver, and the lack of staff is impacting our hospitals. What are your party's plans to improve the situation? Chris.
Same thing with housing. Our healthcare issues have been building for quite some time. If we don't address our needs in long-term care, it is going to continue to have a significant impact on our healthcare system. There are so many seniors waiting in hospital for care. They're taking up needed beds, and they're using needed resources and staff that we need for people with serious illness. To repair that system, we have to make that investment. And for the PC party, it's going to be a $1.5 billion investment. We need to build 2,400 beds. We need to staff those beds with 2,000 people that have the best training and have adequate staffing levels so that they don't incur mental illness or harm on the job site. 22% is the injury rate in long-term care for people that are supporting patients, while it's 7% in the rest of our healthcare. Approximately 5% of Nova Scotians consume 70% of our provincial health dollars. We need to increase in-home care. The Inspire program makes sense. It's been tested across the province. Every dollar that we spend in home care equates to a $21 saving within our health system. If we don't fix long-term care, and if we don't start treating people in their homes, the system's unsustainable.
Fair enough. Claudia.
So how do we get doctors, nurses, and other health professionals? Absolutely, this is without question, in the last 4 years, the number one question that I get from constituents is, I don't have a family doctor, what do I do? And so we know that this is a thorny problem because there is a global competition for health care staff. But we also know that the Liberal government took their eye off the ball. So when I was elected in 2017, there were still physicians who had been told as recently as a year, 18 months previously, that there was a glut of doctors. They probably weren't going to hand out any more licensing numbers. So this was a massive failure, actually, of Nova Scotia Health. And so we need to fix it. We need to put a ton of energy into not just recruitment, but also retention, integrating physicians and their families into our communities, and also expanding primary care teams. So physician assistants, which they use in the military. There are many retired physician assistants in Nova Scotia that could work on primary care teams and emergency care teams, nurse practitioners. We can build those teams. We can build them into collaborative teams that can offer more care. Virtual care has been a benefit of the pandemic, that doctors now can practice that way. We would extend that. We would invest in community health care centers, and we would expand the midwifery program, which actually would take a lot of pressure off of our hospital.
Thank you. Research shows that the quality of life, of work life, of nurses, care workers, and other essential workers in long-term care has a direct effect on the quality of life of the residents. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the problems in the system and made things even worse. Mm-hmm. How do you propose to fix long-term care staffing issues and improve the quality of life of people living in long-term care facilities? Claudia.
So this is an issue that we have been vocal on for many, many years. The Liberal government has built 57 long-term care beds in 8 years. We have been advocating for those 8 years for more beds. We have been told people want to stay in their homes. Well, of course people want to stay in their homes. Number one, they don't have appropriate care to do that in many cases. And number two, for many people, it's not a choice. So we know that this needs urgent addressing. We would build a room for every resident. We would start, there are many rooms to be built. So our campaign promise is to do that by 2030. That would be a bathroom for every resident. And frankly, that's an ambitious target because there are thousands of rooms to be built. We would have legislated staffing ratios. Again, you can look at our legislative record. We've been pushing for that for at least 4 years, 4.1 hours per resident. That is required. We would raise the wages of CCAs funded by the Department of Health. This is back to that recruitment question. These folks don't make enough money to work in a single facility, to have a single job. This was part of the tragedy that happened at Northwood. And by the way, Northwood was twice turned down for funding by this government for a very much needed infrastructure expansion, and one that we and my colleague Lisa, as the MLA for that area, pushed for doggedly and did not get. We would establish a seniors advocate, and we would make sure that this was at the front of our agenda.
Thank you. Chris?
Well, with one of the highest proportions of seniors in the country, over 65 at 18.9%, our prevalence in senior leads increased stress in our primary, acute, and long-term care sectors. At our current trajectory, the need for long-term care will rise dramatically in the coming years. We don't need 14 or 2,000 beds by 2030. We need them now. By 2030, we need 20,000. 20,000 long-term care beds. The current system was built on a premise that no longer exists. We must modernize it. We need to help seniors stay in their home as long as they can, if it's good for them. We need staffing ratios on patient numbers that make sense and are based on fragility and cognitive condition. We need to ensure staff with the right skills to support the challenging health and social care needs of the residents, while also protecting the mental and physical well-being of the staff. We need more staff. We need 2,000 more right now. We need to pay them well and provide them with staffing levels that won't burn them out. We need to make sure that they have access to continuing education to improve their job performance. It's critical that Nova Scotia improves working conditions. As I said in my earlier answer, the injury rate is 22% in our long-term healthcare sector and 7% in the rest of our healthcare sector.
Thank you, Chris. For the next section of questions, I'm turning the microphone over to Stephen.
Thank you, Jeff. So question 9. Gaps in mental health services were evident before this pandemic, and then COVID-19 resulted in additional mental health challenges. How does your party propose to improve mental health services in Nova Scotia? And Chris?
Universal mental health care. Access for everyone, regardless of their ability to pay for it. That's what we're proposing as a party. And is it achievable? I believe it is. The first thing that we're going to do is open the provincial billing codes to private practitioners. Why is that important? Well, for private practitioners that are from out of province and may want to move to this province, it gives them the ability to build a client list fairly quickly using the people backed up in the provincial system. And for people exiting our school programs here with psychology and psychiatry degrees, it helps them establish their practice much quicker. In the last 5 years, I have spent time at the IWK with a family whose child tried to commit suicide. And 8 hours later, that child was pushed out of the IWK with no long-term solution to fix it. I have a friend in Digby whose child tried to commit suicide this year. And she fought to get her daughter the coverage that she needed and the help she needed. It just wasn't available. They ended up doing Skype meetings with a counselor at Halifax. We need this more than ever. The last 2 years have been hard on Nova Scotians, especially those already struggling. And universal mental health care just makes sense.
Claudia?
Well, in theory, we have universal mental health care because mental health is health. And so, in fact, what's happening is that our government is not living up to their commitments to provide universal health care. So it's not a new idea. It's something that ought to exist that is a failure of government. Absolutely, access to healthcare should not be dependent on your ability to pay ever. And in the mental health context, we do have a two-tier system. And our proposal for fixing that is a network of same-day, next-day clinics across the province where people could access mental health care and could be in that system. We would also establish emergency mental health care teams like the ones we have in HRM, but which do not exist in the rest of the province, of interdisciplinary teams that could appropriately respond to mental health emergencies. You know, the stories that Chris shares are heartbreaking, and those are the stories we hear in our office every day as well. We all have heard them, I'm sure. The other thing is that we have twice now introduced a mental health bill of rights. So spending on mental health should be 10% of the provincial budget. Right now it's 4%. So this is, again, why this isn't a new idea. It's not a new commitment. It's a commitment that our government has made under the Canada Health Act that it is not meeting, and we have a plan to meet that commitment. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 10. Canada is a signatory to the Paris Agreement that seeks to limit the global temperature increase to 1.5 centigrade over pre-industrial levels. How does your party propose that Nova Scotia contribute to this commitment? And we'll begin with Claudia.
This isn't a 1.5-minute question, so I hope that you'll look at our platform and also at the recent platform analysis of the Ecology Action Centre. We're committed to doing what needs to be done to prevent further catastrophic climate change. The IPCC report paints an even darker picture than Paris did, and we know we have no choice. That would include a new target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 50% below 1990 levels by 2030, establishing a green jobs task force so that we can go through that economic transformation that we no longer have a choice about, a target of 90% renewables by 2030, and that would include deep retrofits, a new step code designed to bring buildings to net zero by 2032, investment in research and development and battery storage, which is required for the widespread adoption of these renewable energies, reining in Nova Scotia Power, stricter oversight, adding climate change to the mandate of Nova Scotia Power and efficiency, which, if you can believe it, it isn't currently in their mandates to consider that, and supporting local communities and municipalities, many of whom are taking really effective and innovative approaches and just need funding and support from the provincial government to continue to do that. Halifax is a great example of what's happening here in HRM. So that's at the beginning. But the last thing I'll say is,
My partner would so love that button.
Chris.
This is something I'm passionate on, and it's something I've worked in the end of my career in the construction sector. Renewable energy. Renewable energy is going to have a significant impact in Nova Scotia if we allow it to happen. So let me explain. A 100 kilowatt solar array offsets about 96 tons of CO2. In 2030, the price of carbon will be $170 a ton. So a 100 kilowatt array will generate by 2030 $16,320 of annual revenue to the person that deploys the array in carbon credits that they can sell to large emitters. Now let's put that in perspective. IKEA's array is 680 kilowatts. By 2030, it's going to generate $110,976 a year in clean income from their ability to sell those carbon credits on the open market. Why are we not doing it? If the numbers say it's worth it, why aren't we doing it? And it's 2 reasons. One, the Liberals changed the Energy Act in 2014, and they reduced the limit of renewable energy you can supply to the grid from 1 megawatt to 100 kilowatts. It protected Nova Scotia Power's monopoly. The other thing they did is they let them bring out a predatory contract that said if you sign onto their net metering agreement, you forfeit those carbon credits which have intrinsic value. We have good, responsible corporate clients in this province that want to deploy renewable energy, and the government legislation is not supporting it.
Continuing on with the theme of climate change not only impacts the province's infrastructure and ecosystems, it also impacts the residents of HRM, especially vulnerable communities. How do you propose that the province respond to climate change and mitigate its impacts on vulnerable communities? And we'll begin with Chris.
Okay, this one I got to read because this is a long policy, and I tried to highlight the best parts of it. In 2007, the Progressive Conservative Party passed a very innovative bill. It was the Environmental Goals and Sustainability Act, and it received unanimous assent in the legislature. It was the first of its kind in Canada. It tied the environment to economic development and growth. Now, in subsequent years, other governments failed to implement that policy, and it's changed over time. So what we're proposing on the first day if we form the next government is we will introduce a new Enviro Goals and Climate Change Reduction Act. We're going to continue what we started in 2007. A change in government never saw the full realization of this legislation, and it's terrible. Number one, we will implement the independent review of forestry practices known as the Leahy Report. At least 20% of the total land and water mass in Nova Scotia will be legally protected. We will update our environmental impact assessment process to consider the cumulative impacts of any development that would potentially affect wetlands. We're going to increase local food consumption to 20%. We will update the existing environmental decision-making process to include diversity, inclusion, and equity. Commit 80% of our electrical needs being produced by renewable energy by 2030. Environmental education in our schools. And we're going to give the Department of Environment the teeth they need to enforce.
To question 12, and we're going to change subjects a bit. Recognizing that the principal relationship between
I didn't get to answer the question.
Oh, I knew that I was going to do this tonight, and with all the numbers and things, so I am sorry, Claudia. I'm tempted to give you an extra 30 seconds, but that wouldn't be fair to that wouldn't be fair to Chris. No. So Claudia, sorry about that.
That's okay. So there's a lot we can say about the environment and should, and Chris mentioned carbon credits. We don't do carbon credits here in Nova Scotia, although maybe we will. We have a cap and trade system, but certainly that's something that needs to be looked at. But to the point of environmental racism, which I think is what this question contemplates, it's something that our party has long been involved with. We will bring forward, again, an act that we've had on the order paper on and off for at least 5 years, probably longer, called an Act to Redress Environmental Racism. And that specifically contemplates this question, the infrastructure and ecosystems that specifically impact vulnerable communities, many of whom are often racialized communities. And in that act, we would require government to first identify these facilities that are proximate to vulnerable and or racialized communities, and to come up with a plan led by and in consultation with the communities themselves for how to redress it and then do that. This is really important. When I got dinged off a few minutes ago, I was talking about a just transition. This is part of that just transition. We can't talk about things like green energy and electric vehicles and sustainability without remembering that there are so many people who have no choice, and those people are so often at the front lines of the climate crisis.
And again, I apologize for my error. So moving to question 12. Recognizing that the principal relationship between the Crown and Indigenous peoples resides with the federal government, what does your party identify as the top 2 priorities that the Nova Scotia government can take to achieve reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Nova Scotia? And how does your party plan to address them? Claudia.
Well, I mean, I think that this is not my question to answer. I think the answer is we will do what is asked of us urgently right now in this moment by First Nations themselves. But the first step in that is to implement the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for provincial governments. We have introduced legislation that would address those specific recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for provincial governments, of which there are several, and I would encourage people to look them up. We would once again introduce that legislation and we would pass it. Similarly, there are a number of recommendations from the report on missing and murdered Indigenous women that have not been addressed by provincial governments. And I'll just highlight one, which is the practice of birth alerts. This disproportionately impacts racialized women and especially Indigenous women, where there is an alert for a mother when she goes into a hospital to give birth and her child is apprehended at birth. We now know about things like the 60s scoop and about the ways in which Child Protective Services have continued some of the worst practices that we first saw in residential schools in terms of separating families. So,
now, just to be fair, I should skip Chris, but I won't. Chris?
This question is close to my heart. I don't know how many people in this room have spent time on a reserve, or the people online tonight, but I've made several trips to the high Arctic, and I've been in several communities in Nova Scotia. The construction company I worked for was working towards its PAR certification with Indigenous peoples, and we had an Indigenous coordinator that taught me a lot. We had a water treatment division that we were deploying across Canada to help the smaller communities get clean drinking water. If you don't believe that the residential school system has harmed these people beyond belief, I don't know how I can explain it to you. The hurt in that community is severe. So what we need to do at the provincial level, number one, is we need to listen and we need to learn. We need to acknowledge their real history in our education program, and that includes teaching kids about the residential school program and the effect it had on these communities. For our part as citizens, we need to understand that First Nations are an integral part of our community and province. We need to show respect to their culture, learn from their generations-long respect for our environment, and show them we've learned from the past mistakes and make a greater effort to make sure it never happens again.
Question 13. Our two churches are called to love, to seek justice, and to respect the dignity of every human being. We have seen the burning of campaign signs of a Black woman candidate. We, along with many others, have been concerned about racism and white supremacist ideology. How will you and your party take action against intolerance, racism, and expressions of hate? Chris.
It's disturbing to me that we're still asking this question in 2021. Deeply disturbing. We all know no one's born a racist. It's a learned behavior, it's taught. We all try to do self-reflection of our own biases. Some people don't see evidence of it until you do the kind of reflection that gets to the core of the bias. We have hate laws. We hope our government walks the walk. And we believe, most Nova Scotians genuinely believe that they're open and free of bias. It's why this question is still being asked today. We need to do better. Our best shot at stamping out bias and racism is with education. Investing in diversity training in our schools so that kids learn the different cultures around us and respect the value of diversity in our communities. And that includes teaching them about the residential school system. If we can start to change bias and racism at a young age, we have a chance to greatly decrease the white supremacy ideology. It takes education and a commitment from government to walk the walk and set the example. Use the laws at our disposal to punish if necessary, and educate where possible.
Thank you. Claudia? Just a second, Claudia. Would turn your mic on.
Okay. Sorry.
Start our time again.
Okay. I can sing the 1, 2, 3, 4 song. We've always, in the New Democratic Party, put equity at the center of our platform and of our efforts, and we take an intersectional approach. What happened in Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River, which is the name of the constituency, not to be missed actually in this conversation, where the candidate sign was burned, is completely unacceptable, and we would denounce it in the strongest terms. And we have a record of working against this. Absolutely, we need education, but we also need concerted efforts to shift the structures that we exist in, because so much of the racism we experience is structural. That's why we fought for a moratorium on street checks. That's why we continue to fight for the results of the Wortley report to be instituted in full. We know that government has a role in bringing community together, and we need to address that intolerance. And so we look to the community for those answers, and in particular to the impacted communities. Our caucus has met with the Decade for Persons of African Descent weekly for the past couple of years. We have good relationships with communities across the province, and we try to move forward with what we learn in those conversations and amplify the voices that are leading those struggles.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Chris. I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Stephen. Women are more likely to earn less, to have to survive on lower incomes, and to be victims of intimate partner violence. Furthermore, this pandemic has been described as a she-cession or she-recession. Women also face attitudes about gender and sexuality that trivialize harassment and the sexual violence they face. Women have to overcome these and many other systemic and societal barriers to achieve their full potential. What does your party intend to do to improve the situation of women in our society? I think it's your turn.
Okay, well, not 1.5 minute answer again, so I'll wait to hear the bell and then I'll stop. But I think similarly, there are a lot of structural issues, and those are issues we've been working really active on. Issues like childcare. I have 3 kids, and the school looks the same as it did in the 1950s. They go to school at 9, they come home at 3, they don't get fed. We would bring in a universal school food program. We would bring in $10 a day daycare. We would bring in before and after school care. That makes a difference. That makes a difference in the ways that women can show up in society. To the caring piece, the deficits in long-term care that we talked about, those have a disproportionate impact on women who tend to act as caregivers. Similarly, when we look at the devastating events of April 2020, the Portapique mass casualty, we pushed for a full inquiry that included a gender lens to look at the ways in which misogyny is a precondition to violence so often. So we, to that end, also would offer core funding to organizations serving women and gender diverse people. We need to do more, but I think that's a start, and I think the caring professions are our way forward. We can address these issues in all the ways I talked about, and we can actually build the economy, because these are important jobs, and they're jobs that have been undervalued for too long.
Thank you, Claudia. Chris?
I've been blessed with some really strong women in my life, very strong. And one of them is my 70-year-old mother, who's been out on the campaign trail with me every day. There's a good chance half the people we talk to are going to cross out my name and write in hers. I want to be clear. This pandemic has had a greater impact on women in our society than it has men. Women are in our industries, in our government, their mothers, aunts, and sisters. They take the greater responsibility in the stability of our families. The past 2 years, they've had to be teachers, tutors, homemakers, referees. They made most of the decisions around families and security, and could their child even play with the child next door during a pandemic? The number one reason we're coming through this pandemic is because of the women in our community, bar none. In the unionized construction trades, everyone's paid the same according to the level of apprenticeship and journey person. If the unionized construction sector is working hard to ensure equal pay, doesn't it make sense that the rest of industry do so? We have laws, they need to be enforced. We must set an example in government, and we need to make sure that corporations are meeting the standards and held to account. Violence against women is a crime. We need to ensure a social safety net that's there for them and gives them the opportunity to escape violence and get the mental health care they need to overcome it. We're failing them, there is no doubt.
Thank you, Chris. All right, budget deficits. COVID's caused us to deficit budget in a big way at every level. Along with capital spending, they've added to Nova Scotia's debt. The most recent provincial budget projects a growth of the debt of 27% over the next 4 years. The burden of paying the debt back takes a bite out of annual expenditures and will continue to do so for future generations. What's your party's plan to do something about budget deficits and the debt? Chris.
Me? Oh, sorry. Okay, well, we're at $17 billion in debt and climbing. It's 106% of GDP. We've already crossed the barrier of paying back the debt that our economy can produce in income. It's pretty severe. But in comparison to other provinces, we're in fairly good shape. Our debt load per individual in Nova Scotia is, I think, around $16,000 or $17,000 per person. In Newfoundland, it's $55,000. In Ontario, it's $53,000. We need more people in this province. We need an aggressive immigration strategy to bring people, industry, and business to this province. We are not big enough to sustain the services that we demand as clients of the government. We need it desperately. So the fundamental plan of the PC party is to attract that investment and bring those people to this province. We need to do it. I think as we go on and we look at the expenditures that we're taking on, we can't stop now. If anything, it's almost double down time. All right, our healthcare system, our mental health, our EHS system, the dam's cracking. We have stuck way too much bubble gum in the cracks, and now there's more bubble gum than concrete. So we have to make these investments. But there is precedence to this. The Second World War. Canada took on far more debt than it could ever possibly pay back. But the returning of our soldiers and immigration, we were able to offset that with GDP.
All right, thank you. Claudia.
So the term she-cession in the previous question was coined by Armine Yilnazian, who's a fantastic economist. I suggest everyone look her up. And her view on the subject is that, you know, we're in a time of unprecedented low interest rates and very high need. And it would be irresponsible of us not to take care of people in the way that they need to be taken care of. So I think that's the fundamental. But recognizing, of course, that fiscal responsibility is absolutely core to the job of government. There's no question about this. And it's core to the work that we are elected to do, and that is to take care of people. And what I have seen in the last 4 years are the caring professions, which I mentioned I think are the future of our economy. They're green, they're important, they're largely female. Those are seen as cost centers. Those are seen as cost centers by our government. We can't afford enough health care. We can't afford environmental protection, education, et cetera. And we see them as investments. We need to spend smarter. So we don't need to spend $1 million a day keeping people in alternative level of care beds in hospitals. We can keep them in long-term care for a fraction of that cost with the right investment. We don't need to spend millions of dollars on infrastructure once the climate has changed further, but we can spend better money smarter now on mitigation. We don't need to spend millions of dollars on jails when so often what people need is mental
Thank you both. So we're coming to the section of the program where we have questions from the public. Do people want to get up and stretch? Just move a little bit?
Sure.
I think that'd be a good idea. Give yourself a minute to work out some kinks. And have a glass of water. Do we have 30 seconds after break? Yes. You can have 2.5 minutes. At the back, to the right. Back.
that may or may not be happening at individual returning offices, but absolutely, if anyone is watching this or knows somebody or is connected to somebody in the community, if people are turned away, absolutely they or an advocate can call Elections Nova Scotia, and they should still be permitted to vote, because I know this was an issue that came up early, but they have made a statement to that effect. And this is the root of why so much of our efforts this campaign have been focused on housing and housing security, because people need a roof over their heads. The question earlier was, is housing a human right? Absolutely, housing is a human right. Everybody deserves to have a roof over their heads. Voting is the least of their problems, honestly. You know, if I don't have a home, voting is not high on my list, whether or not it should be. You know, where I'm going to sleep and what I'm going to eat. So, you know, absolutely, people should be allowed to vote, and I've been told that they will be, and I hope if anyone has any trouble that they can reach out to the returning office or to me directly.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I actually had a conversation with a reporter here a couple weeks ago, and they mentioned that one of the issues with homeless people getting employment was not having a fixed address for payroll. And my brain started spinning. The hardest thing about campaigning is meeting the people in need. I had a chance to sit down with Gloria McCluskey, and she suggested I take a walk down a couple of streets and talk to a few people, and I did. And it was incredibly eye-opening. And there has to be innovative ways to get over this. Like, set up a program with Canada Post so that we can give them a P.O. box address free of charge. I mean, there are common sense things that we can do to help these people in the short term. Now, I kind of agree with Claudia. When you're in that situation, I think it's very hard to think about voting, especially when we have a 50.8% turnout in Dartmouth in the last election. You know, half the people in Dartmouth didn't turn up to vote. I think by and large, everybody's disenfranchised with government, and they think that their vote doesn't count. The unfortunate part with that is that it greatly affects our democracy. You know, we have seen things in government of late that are very concerning, like the delisting of a protected property for sale to a golf developer. These are things that happen when we take our eye off the ball. So they should have a voice. I hope they do vote. But, you know, I think that there's just some common sense things that we can do in the short term to help these people that don't cost a great deal of money and just require a little bit of effort to get it done.
Thank you. All right, the next question from the audience. Schools are not well maintained. For example, windows that don't open. It is very difficult to access any information from the Centre for Education. What is the solution? Well, you'll have to make the best you can. The focus, I think the focus is in the fact that our school buildings are not well maintained. Okay. And that they run down quickly, and that we don't maintain them well enough, that we have to keep building new ones, for one thing.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry?
Okay.
Yeah, it's your turn, right.
Well, 15 years in the construction industry teaches you a lot about this. It's not just schools, it's every building. If you knew the state of our hospitals, the emergency power systems that support them, the air systems that funnel air through them, there is a great deal wrong. At several facilities. I've been in most of them. Same with our schools. Air quality, I would say there's a really good argument to say that about 80% of our public buildings are not well, right? They're ill buildings. We're not maintaining them. And there's a simple reason for it. Government can come up with capital expenditures to build it, but coming up with the money to maintain it is becoming increasingly hard. And then when you look at something like a hospital, how do you break up those dollars when you need heart monitors and you need to replace a fan wall supplying fresh air to the building, right? So these are really complex issues, but I can tell you this, we've done a terrible job of it forever. It's going to continue until we have a concerted effort to invest in our buildings and make sure that they meet the highest quality standards. It's going to require effort. It's going to require money, and it's going to start, you have to start listening to the industry that's telling you it's broken. Really good case in point, Veterans Memorial. About 4 or 5 years ago, one of our technicians was in there and there was a valve that was imminently going to fail on the air conditioning system. And he told them, it is imminently going to fail. Could be days, could be weeks, could be months, but you need to know there's 12 weeks to order that valve. And what ended up happening? We ended up having veterans in a hospital with fans in the windows because they had no air conditioning for weeks. It's irresponsible. We need to change it. There's a way to do it. And it's been proven time and time again. Investment in maintaining far exceeds capital expenditures and emergencies.
Thank you. Claudia.
Well, this is a question really near and dear to my heart, partly because I have 3 children who attend a school with no ventilation, very few windows, and some that don't open, and also because I have served as the education critic for the last 4 years. And so there's a structural answer, and there's a political answer. And the political answer is that we need to depoliticize school capital. And so what has happened is with the dissolution of school boards, which my record will show I railed against, in 2018, we lost any vestige of transparency in decisions around school capital. So it used to be that the regional centers for education, including the HRCE here, which governs also Dartmouth, would submit a list of schools that needed to be replaced or that needed repairs. That was a public process. Cabinet could accept that or not, but there was a record of what the community and the people on the ground thought needed to happen. That has disappeared. And so now you can play match the improvement to the cabinet minister, literally, when you look at school improvements. That is not the way it should be. Our public buildings should be maintained, and I agree that the level of maintenance of those buildings is dismal as a general rule. It's not just hospitals, it's also public housing, it's schools. As a result, when we get money, it all goes to deferred maintenance because we haven't taken care of the schools along the way. But also, all of these buildings, as we maintain and replace them, need to either go through deep retrofits to ensure that they are sustainable and or be replaced with buildings that use renewable energy, that don't draw off the grid. But all of that needs to be transparent. And so, this is a massive issue that we have experienced with this government, and this is one example of it. So the short answer is, what do? We fix them. But how do we make sure that happens? We depoliticize the process.
Thank you both. Now, question about the arts and the film industry. One can preface this by referring back to the loss of a program which seemed to cause great difficulty for the film industry in this province. What is your plan to support the arts and the film industry in this province?
Well, they say that you enter politics because you get asked or you get mad. And I got mad. And one of the things I was really mad about, in addition to the changes to education, were the axing of the film tax credit, because I have so many friends who work in the cultural sector. So what are we going to do about it? Well, we would invest 1%. I'm kind of looking at my cheat notes here because I have our platform. But we would invest 1% of the provincial budget into arts and culture. We hear this government talk a lot about tourism and spend a very little on arts and culture, and that's a massive disconnect. If we want people to visit Nova Scotia, they visit Nova Scotia because it's an amazing place and we have incredible arts and culture, and we need to invest in those sectors. That includes increasing core and operational funding to local arts organizations, which is always a massive challenge, particularly coming out of the pandemic. We've seen a lot of programs where it's like you get a grant to get a consultant to help you do it, like a Zoom production, which is sort of fine as a stopgap, but that's not the core work that a lot of artists do, and they need to be supported in that core work. We need an arts infrastructure strategy, and we need portable system of benefits. And so this is something we're talking about across a lot of these professions. I think Chris mentioned the number of Nova Scotians that don't have a pension. This is true in the early childhood sector. This is very true in the arts and culture sector. People who choose a career in the arts often choose, knowingly or not, to retire in poverty, and that's not fair. These organizations and individuals that give so much to our province are treasures. And in other cultures, we treat culture as a treasure, and we feel that way about culture here, but government doesn't treat it that way, and an NDP government absolutely would.
Chris?
For sure. It was very short-sighted for the current Liberal government and the Nova Scotia film tax credit. Incredibly short-sighted. We've seen the effects on tourism in other countries that have had very successful production industries. Ireland with the Game of Thrones, with Lord of the Rings in New Zealand. Right? When you get to highlight the beauty of the place that you live in, it attracts people, and they're curious. They want to see it for themselves. So canceling that was it was a poor decision. It was one of the best ways for us to attract visitors to this province. And I agree with Claudia. Culture is the number one reason they're coming, other than landscape and views. But culture is a significant part of it. And I don't think we don't do a great job of our culture here in Nova Scotia. We've got so much to offer. And I think that we have to think of it as a strategic investment in tourism. If we're going to bring people here, we have to have something to bring them for. So it's a requirement.
Thank you for that. I have one more question, and then Stephen has some more questions from the audience.
Sure.
This question will be very brief. It's on behalf of the youth of this province. It's not easy being a young person these days. Between COVID and all the other challenges, there's so many challenges facing young people today. What would your government do for young people is my simple question. Where are we? I think it's you.
Is it?
I believe.
For sure, it's investment in mental health care for our youth. The Canadian Mental Health Association says that 1 in 5 Canadians suffer with a mental health issue, but 70% of those cases were a traumatic experience that they experienced in childhood or adolescence. 70%, right? That's a big number. I think there's a whole bunch of things at play that have to do with that, and I think one of the primary ones is social media. I can tell you this right now. If everybody in the world had a camera on their cell phone when I was a teenager, I would not be running for politics. Right? The stress of having their lives documented and shared on social media for perpetuity is incredible. So mental health has to be a primary focus for us in adolescents and youth. If 70% of those cases are from youth, that's where we need to put our focus. Children need our help, and COVID has been ridiculously stressful on them. It's isolation from their social groups, having to spend more than one day with your brother and sister in a confined room. These have been challenges. So we have to get very serious about it, and we have to get very serious about getting them the help they need, when they need it, and where they need it.
Thank you, Chris. Claudia.
My children I have 10-year-old twins and an 8-year-old, and it occurred to me the other day that they don't really remember life that well pre-pandemic, which is such a strange thing to think about. And so I think this is an important question, and we don't know what the world is going to look like. Honestly, none of us do. But what we do know, and what we talked about earlier, is the number of children in Nova Scotia living in poverty. And so if we really want to change children's lives, the number one thing we can do is work to alleviate poverty. We've been talking about that all night, and those include supports for families and all the other things that we've discussed. Those include a school food program. These are basic needs, right? This is beyond, these are the basics: housing, food, before and after school care, quality early childhood education. All of those things are pivotal. But I think for older children as well, one of the things we talk about, and I was dinged off when I was trying to say this earlier, is, when we talk about the environmental crisis that we're facing, we're all going to have to change our patterns significantly. And we need that transition to be just, and it needs to be just for the folks on the front lines, and it needs to be just also for our kids. And so one of the ways that we're working to achieve both of those things is to work towards making tuition, particularly at community colleges, low cost or free, so that people who are having to retrain or people who are entering the workforce have the opportunity to do that, have the opportunity to have a career in a profession of the future that is sustainable, that is green, where we can work to mitigate the challenges we face now. And it's certainly something, as a parent, I'm absolutely committed to.
Thank you both. Stephen, your turn.
So we have 4 more questions, and then we have closing. So we
Okay.
might be out of here a little bit before the 2 hours. So. With Metro having the highest rate of youth trafficking in the country, what can your party do to stop this? Claudia.
Well, I've been fortunate to spend a lot of time with Mia Swakanosio and Charlene Gagnon, who work with the United Way, and in particular with the TESS program, which is a network around the province of folks working on this issue. And really, I think this goes back to what we were talking about before. You know, so often in elected life, we don't need new ideas. We need to listen to the very good ideas that already exist and are happening in community. We have a network of people who are working on this issue, having great success, doing a wonderful job training everyone from law enforcement to politicians to educators. And so absolutely, I think it's about finding programs like that and others and supporting them with core funding, with publicity, if you will, kind of sharing that information, and destigmatizing the whole topic to ensure that, you know, folks know that children are vulnerable. We know this. But particularly, again, back to the question of poverty, youth in care, children living in poverty, children who are precariously housed, children who experience food insecurity are more vulnerable and are more vulnerable to issues like sexual trafficking. So all of these are a concerted effort, but I think we have amazing work happening in the province on this issue already, and certainly I would look to support that work.
Thank you, Claudia. Chris?
You know, I've taken a couple days out of the campaign to meet with some of the advocacy groups in Dartmouth. And this morning I met with Kristen Dunn over at the YWCA over in Woodside. And she talked about the various programs that the YWCA has for women in crisis that are leaving, you know, the sex trades or have been trafficked. And it's pretty horrific. It's disgusting. We need to support these groups. They're doing really good work. We need to support it. And so one of the conversations I have with Krista today, because in my former career in construction, I was a machine at getting government funding for initiatives that we had as a company. And it takes a lot of research. You got to look in a lot of places. So I asked her, I said, Krista, how do you get your funding? Well, we get so much from over here, and we get so much from over there, we get so much from over here, and this person contributed. And I said, how do you find it? We have to go look for it, was her answer. Doesn't it make sense that we have a central database in this province that brings every department together and the programs that they have to support these entities and put it in one place where they can do the research and get at the funding that they need? It's a pretty simple solution. The funding's out there, but not very many people are accessing some of it. And it's because they don't know it's there. We need to change that. We need to get them the funding that's there. And we need to get it in a vehicle that provides them up-to-date information with the contacts, what's available, and what they can do with the funding. It's a simple solution, and it's one that we need.
Thank you, Chris. We know that education is not equitable across the province for a variety of reasons. What are you and your party's top 2 priorities to ensure teaching and learning conditions are equitable and inclusive for all? Chris.
Yeah, it's not just across the province, it's an HRM here too. My sister's been leading the fight across Nova Scotia for kids with dyslexia. About 35% of the kids in our education system are not getting the basic reading and writing skills that they need, and a lot of them suffer from learning disabilities, and it's not reflected in the current curriculum that we're delivering to kids. So it's here in Metro too. It's not just across the province. We need to do better, right? We need to give kids equal opportunity to access education across the board. We need to make sure that vocation is part of our curriculum in schools. When I went to school, I did wood shop. I learned to sew. I even learned to cook. And my mother did a much better job after to make sure it was even better. But these are skills that our children need, and we need to make sure they're available in our school systems. It's simple. We need to give them the education that they require in the place that they require it.
Thank you. Claudia.
Well, there's sort of two parts. One is, we had a big effort towards inclusive education. We had a massive consultation a few years back that was nominally accepted by government, but they didn't accept all of the recommendations. And one was to have an independent evaluation of the implementation of that plan. And we haven't had that. And this, again, goes back to that question of transparency. We're told it's working, but we have no way of evaluating that. And anecdotally, I think Chris brought up the issue of kids who experience dyslexia, but there are many other children in our system who continue to be underserved and fall behind. They wouldn't all be caught up in the inclusive education, but one of the things that panel suggested is, we need universal design. We don't need to design little exceptions so that certain kids can get access to certain things. We need to design an education system where all children can experience an excellent education. We have not done that yet. We have a lot more work to do. And I would suggest that the other piece of that, again, has to do with losing our school boards. And so I think, there were school boards that were dysfunctional, there were school boards that were functional, there were lots of reasons that people had challenges, but the school boards were a democratic layer of accountability that existed in the education system. And we feel the loss of that because, again, we have no transparency, we have no line into what's happening in our schools, and it's really to the detriment of families and students in particular, because those students don't have a particular, and families don't have a particular place to advocate that's at all independent. And that's a challenge, and we hear that from families all the time. So we need to look at bringing that back. We need to look at what that would be like to bring a democratic layer back into the education system.
Thank you. The next question. Will you respect fair and collective bargaining processes? Claudia.
Yes.
Chris.
I've worked in the unionized construction sector for 15 years. Absolutely.
Thank you. That was easy. If you are elected MLA in Dartmouth South, will you support the Scotia Pass or a similar vaccine passport which will bar the unvaccinated from businesses, public events, and services? Chris.
Wow. Thanks for the fluff question. This can't be answered in a minute and a half. This is a pretty complex issue, and we need to weigh the needs of the community and the health of the community above all else. But we also have to make sure that we don't incite new forms of racism and ostracization. It was funny. When I met with my primary caregiver and talked about getting vaccinated, she said, yes, get it soon. Get it the first one you can get. It's in your best interest. And so me and my partner did. We went and we got the AstraZeneca shot for our first shot. It's the first one available. Immediately, we had friends judging us. No, you should have waited for Moderna. You should have waited for Pfizer. Why did you go get the AstraZeneca? That was the wrong thing to do. It was unreal. And I remember looking at one of my friends and said, this is what we're going to do now? We're going to vaccine shame people? Like, this is a little ridiculous. So I think in principle, there's a lot of that makes sense. But we have to make sure that when we do this, we're not inciting a portion of the population to judge other people or exclude them, or use it as a means to, what are we going to call it, vaccine racism? All right, so we have to be careful. And it has to be implemented in an appropriate way that takes that into consideration.
Claudia.
Well, this idea was floated yesterday by the Liberal government, who said that if elected, they would consider a Scotia Pass. So, I think we could say if elected, we might also consider a vaccine passport. But to the question of would we implement one, I don't know. But what I will say is We have been extremely consistent in following and supporting the advice of public health since March of 2020. We have supported them in the vaccine rollout, we have supported them through testing, and we will continue to listen to public health, who I think has guided us very well through this pandemic, as they advise on how to go forward with vaccination and further opening.
Thank you for your responses, and thank you for your questions. So we're going to move to closing statements, and then there will be a chance for us to show our appreciation and just a couple of announcements before we finish up the evening. And Claudia, you have the opportunity to go first on this one.
Okay, well, I'll keep this very short. I really appreciate everyone sticking with us. It's a lot of questions and a lot of content for me. I'm sure it is for you. Thank you to the hosts. Thank you, Chris, for a constructive conversation tonight. And thank you to everyone watching at home and to the tech crew up there. I really believe that everyone who stands for public office does so because they think they can make a difference. And I think that an engaged electorate votes for people based on their stand on the issues. And so that's what we've come here to do tonight. From my perspective, the NDP has a proven record on almost everything that we have discussed tonight. We have consistently championed solutions to poverty, increasing and improving education, fixing long-term care. So many of these questions are so core to the work that I've been involved in over the last 4 years, and they're so deeply what I care about. I'll close as I began and say that I love this community. I love Dartmouth. It's been a privilege to serve as the MLA for Dartmouth. And if you agree with what you've heard tonight, I would ask you to support me in returning to that office. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claudia. And Chris, you get the last word.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for organizing this debate tonight. It's really hard, to share pretty robust policies in a minute and a half. The PC policy is a 150-page document that's fully costed, right? Fully costed for all of our initiatives. So it's really hard for me to convey. I hope I conveyed the bigger points of that message. All parties, and I believe this, whether you're Liberal, whether you're PC, whether you're Green or NDP, nobody owns humanity in terms of their care for community. Every politician, I have to believe this because it's why I'm getting involved. Every politician gets involved because they want to make a difference. Nobody's doing this for the notoriety. Nobody's doing it for the pay. Right? We get involved because we think we have ideas that can be a benefit to the community. And then we align with a policy and a party that we think will help us achieve that. So our common humanity is what connects us all. I don't think anybody has a proven track record in this province in terms of being the absolute in that category. Nobody. We have failed for many, many years. There's been NDP governments, there's been PC governments, and there's been Liberal governments. So we've all had a crack at it, and predominantly we haven't got the results that our citizens are demanding. I do think our policy is transformational. It's got some really good concepts that some of them aren't even going to cost government a lot of money, like the paycheck guarantee or Nova Scotia Loyal. But the problem that we have with social media today is we tend to only get one stream of consciousness that goes towards our ideology. We don't actually take the time to look at the other parties' platforms. And I encourage the people here tonight and the people watching online to do just that. Make an informed decision. Make an informed vote. I can tell you personally for myself, if elected, I'm going to show up every day. Every day I'm going to champion for this community. And I want to earn your vote.
Now, before we say thank you, and Jeff.
My thank you, and then yours. My thank you is to the candidates. This is an editorial, a short editorial, which I normally do not indulge in. But I wanted to congratulate both of the candidates for the job that they have done tonight, for the thoughtfulness with which they expressed themselves, and for their willingness to put up with all of us for this length of time. It's a tiring process, and I have great admiration for people who can survive it. So, personally for me, thank you both.
So just a reminder, folks, that the candidates will meet with you if you want, and if you want to meet with each other, outside, okay? We have been, don't go yet, but when we finish up, we invite you to remember social distancing and to exit and enjoy the wonderful evening. I want to say thank you to those who made this possible. I was on the beach in Shediac when all this planning happened, so all I had to do was show up and read what I was supposed to read. So for the planning committee and the AV team, thank you so much for making this possible. The video will be available online. You can go to the website, go to either Christchurch or our church website, and you'll find it, and it will be available until Election Day. And so you can have a look at it, you can show your friends, you can go back and look at some of the answers that were given. And to finish up, the most important thing, make sure you vote. Go vote.